Being the daughter of a narcissist. Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor. The common interaction between narcissist and victim is that of the romantic entanglement, but one that is almost as equally common but perhaps less spoken about is the familial entanglement. An instance where there is an adult child of a narcissist, the mother or father, or perhaps even both, are narcissists. Sometimes it might be a sibling, sometimes it might be your child. I have advised many people that have found themselves with a familial entanglement and all of the issues that come with that. There are many women who find themselves in the position of being the daughter of a narcissist, and often they do not realize what they are entangled with until they are adults. Some never realize, seeking to try and achieve the unobtainable with an individual that never provides them with what they think that they ought to receive from a supposedly loving parent. Others sometimes reach the realization after the demise of the relevant parent, and for others, the dawning occurs whilst the parent is still alive, and they then face the difficulties of the consideration of the imposition of a no-contact regime, often feeling very guilty about considering cutting off that relevant member of their family. Recently, in the Times, there were instances of women who have been involved with a narcissist parent, and I thought it advantageous to share these recollections and provide commentary about them. The catalyst for sharing the disclosures was actually the BBC television programme Amandaland, whereby the uber mean girl, Amanda, a clear fictional representation of a narcissist, has a very difficult relationship with her own mother, who's played by Joanna Lumley. And that has caused the journalist to consider the position of a toxic relationship with a mother who is a narcissist, being the daughter of that narcissist. She commences by explaining, "I loved my mother desperately, but when you are the child of a narcissist, you can never be sure that the love is being returned." I'm pausing there. The narcissist is incapable of love. No love is provided because the narcissist has no emotional empathy. But it is difficult for that child because certain narcissists, particularly those of a mid-range variety, will on occasions create the impression of loving the child and then, of course, take that love away. It isn't genuine love, but it feels genuine to the child, for they know no different. And its removal, of course, is part of the devaluing behaviour that is used to treat that child as the object they are seen and to keep them under control. The writer continues, "I never quite got over the disappointment I felt when I rang my mother, and after a bright hello, there would be a pause as she failed to recognise my voice." This failure is born out of the absence of connection between the mother and the child. It's done because the daughter is simply seen as a commodity and an object. It's done because the mother has no need to recognise that voice in a friendly way. It wasn't an age-related thing. I think she just didn't keep her children uppermost in her mind. Correct. The only thing that's uppermost in her mind, subconsciously, is the pursuit of the prime aims. The children only matter when they come up on the radar. On the rare occasions that she rang me, it was always because she wanted me to do something or to tell me off for not doing something, never just to say hello. The parental narcissist in this circumstance isn't just going to ring up to say hello. It's pointless. Whilst it might provide the fuel, this particular narcissist was naturally governed by the necessity of asserting control and getting a residual benefit, namely, ringing up because she needed something, or to nullify a threat to control by telling off the daughter for not doing something. The writer explains, "My mother, the writer and designer Jocasta Innes, was a beautiful woman, and she hated getting older. Aging is, of course, a threat to the issue of control, particularly for somatic narcissists. I remember we were once being interviewed for a newspaper piece, and she told me to lie about my age so that people wouldn't be able to work out how old she was. Lack of emotional empathy, causing another person to lie to make her look better. I suppose that was fair enough. The world then was even more ageist than it is now, but it felt weird. Notice how emotional thinking has already crept in relation to this individual, whereby she's thinking that it was acceptable to behave that way. More hurtful was discovering when I was 10 that in the author's note of her first book, The Pauper's Cookbook, she described herself as having 2 children. At that time, she actually had 4. But she didn't want to complicate the narrative with the children she had left behind with her first husband. Again, the presentation of an image by the narcissist is so important that 2 children are cut from the story, underpinning once again the absence of emotional empathy. I understand now that she didn't want to be judged, or rather, she didn't want a threat to control, but as a child it felt as if I was being written out of her life, which is precisely what it was. Though it was rarely forthcoming, as a teenager I longed for my mother's approval. When I got my first boyfriend, I couldn't wait to go to Swanage, where she lived at the time with my stepfather, and tell her all about it. We went for a walk on the cliffs, but before I could make my announcement, my mother caught me by the arm and said, "Daisy, I've got something to tell you. I have fallen in love." The man in question was an artist who was illustrating her new book and was in his late 20s. At the time, my mother was 41. She swore me to secrecy as my stepfather had no idea that this was brewing. Commission of infidelity, conspiratorial actions for the purposes of assertion of control over the daughter, absence of emotional empathy for the stepfather, absence of emotional empathy for the daughter. I can't remember now, she states, whether I ever got around to telling my mother about the boyfriend, but even if I did, my news clearly couldn't compete with hers. My mother left my stepfather shortly afterwards and started living in a wreck on Brick Lane in East London with the illustrator. I remember going round one evening wearing a tight PVC skirt. I was young, and this was the 80s. The illustrator used to live in Muswell Hill, a place I was interested in because a man I had a crush on at the time lived in the next street. So we spent some time chatting about North London. At the end of the evening, my mother took me aside and accused me of flirting with her boyfriend. This is, of course, a typical response of a narcissist. Because the boyfriend's attention, fuel, was focused on the daughter, this threatened the need for fuel and control of the mother. Rather than chastise him in such circumstances, there is a revision of history by the narcissist's narcissism so that she accuses her own daughter of flirting with her boyfriend. She then states, "I was amazed, as to me he was much too old to be of interest, but clearly that night my mother saw me in my rubber skirt as a threat. Indeed, it is often the case that female narcissists see their daughters, when they get older, as a threat to them with regard to their control of men." Although why she was threatened I can't imagine, as at the time I was what she termed Juno-esque. But it doesn't matter. You see, this is a victim who fails to understand the different perspective that the narcissist has on the situation, which demonstrates that the fact that she is female and has the attention, even if it is a polite conversation, of the boyfriend, that is a threat. Your mere presence, by virtue of the fact that you're female and the individual is a man, amounts to a threat to the narcissist's need for control. I have never felt threatened by my daughters in that way. If my mother was Nancy Mitford's Bolter, then I am closer to Jane Austen's Mrs. Bennet. Every time I look at them, I swell with vicarious pride. The more luscious they look, the happier I am. I went to a party recently where I was fangirling a famous writer about how much I liked his work. Halfway through, his attention wandered as a beautiful young woman walked past. "What a stunning girl," he said. I had to agree with him, as the girl in question was my oldest daughter. I think if it had been anybody else, my vanity might have been seriously dented, but as it was, I simply bathed in her reflected glory. All right, I was a bit annoyed, but that was only because he was a 60-something leching after a girl who was half his age. This demonstrates a differing reaction between a narcissist and a non-narcissist, whereby she's proud of the fact that a man finds her daughter attractive, but also, as a consequence of her moral compass and sense of decency, thinks that there's something wrong with a 60-something leching after a girl who was half his age. But she doesn't respond in a wounded way. She's responding as a consequence of her emotional empathy for her daughter, not because the attention has gone away from her. She continues by explaining, "My failings as a mother lie in the opposite direction. I am the mother who sets up a subscription to Stripe and Stare for my daughter after seeing the state of her knicker drawer. I have to physically restrain myself from brushing her hair before she goes out on a date, or suggesting that perhaps she might wear tights without holes. I once, channeling the spirit of Mrs. Bennet rather than Bridget Jones, asked a very personal young man on a train if he was single. If I had to choose between paying for a facelift or my daughter's wedding, I would rather go wrinkly. That doesn't mean I am not vain, or even on a bad day narcissistic, but I am in complete agreement with the maxim that you are only as happy as your unhappiest child." Again, the writer recognises that she has narcissistic traits, which everybody does. Another individual shares her story as follows. "When I was growing up, my mother was the most incredible woman I had met. She was beautiful, clever, well-travelled, witty. She was the woman I wanted to become. I think that is why, when our relationship collapsed, it hurt so much. As a kid, I had a cool mum. Financially independent and fashionably dressed, she picked me up from school with Annie Lennox blasting and carrying a copy of The Female Eunuch. She was like a best friend. That's often a red flag, but a nurturing one. She cooked family meals terribly, ferried me to horse riding lessons, took me to galleries during the holidays and organised school trips. As a young child, our relationship was the envy of my friends. It was only when I became a teenager that the fault lines between us started to show. The real trouble started when my mother left my stepdad and busily began reclaiming her identity outside being a mother. Just as I was negotiating my entry into womanhood, we found our needs in direct conflict. She wanted freedom, or in other words, she didn't want any shackles on her control. I wanted nurturing, which of course a child still needs, and a parent with emotional empathy would provide that. She no longer wanted to conform, threat to control. I was just working out the rules. I suddenly wanted a mother in a twin set and pearls. Instead, she dyed her hair purple, retook her A-levels, met a gay best friend and went out clubbing. Self-absorption. As teenagers often do, I expressed my need for a mother by rebelling, hoping she'd rein me in. But she never did. Lack of accountability to discipline the child. As I ran away, hitchhiked to Brighton, snuck out of school to meet men, she did little to intervene. Perhaps she thought she was letting me be free, but I hated her for it. No, she might have thought that, but what she was doing was showing an abrogation of responsibilities and duties, demonstrating the lack of accountability of the narcissist. She became more and more distant and seemingly less interested in me. She threw parties that her new friends came to while I hid in my room, revising for my GCSEs. Showcasing, grandiosity, lack of emotional empathy for how that might impact upon her studying for her GCSEs. Because I was dumpy and bookish, and to me she was a glamorous blonde, it never occurred to me that she would perhaps see me as a threat, but in hindsight, perhaps there was some of that. By 17, I was so angry and hurt by how uninvolved in my life she'd become. I moved out of the house. I thought she might come and get me back. Instead, she busily got on with her new fabulous life, emigrating to the Glastonbury hippie scene, again showing an abrogation of responsibilities and duties towards her child. There was one particular incident that seemed to cement the conflict of needs between us. I asked her to take me food shopping for my new flat, demand upon the narcissist. After some cajoling, she agreed. She took me to Sainsbury's, where I filled a trolley, but just as we were queuing for the till, she lost it. "I've wasted my whole life shopping in these fucking supermarkets," she screamed, or words to that effect, and chucking things out of the trolley demanded we left. Heated, ignited fury as a consequence of threat to control. I remember the day my A-level results arrived, and I had to call her in Prague to tell her. She was living with an artist she'd met. Notice again, hopping from different relationships, many intimate relationships, the common behaviour of the narcissist. We kept trying. We always kept trying. In my 20s, we fought and made up more times than I can remember. Tempestuous nature of the relationship with the narcissist. It never worked out. I found her overcritical. Judgmental, haughtiness, assertion of control in relation to my friends, my boyfriends, my looks, my work, my weight. Although I'm sure she would claim she was trying to help. Again, that interfering, micromanaging aspect of certain narcissists whereby they just think that they're being helpful when in actual fact what they're doing is asserting control. I found her dramatic when I wanted calm. I longed for someone to support me unconditionally, but she couldn't or wouldn't put my needs first. Typical behaviour of a narcissist parent. She would probably tell it differently and say I was so independent she couldn't get close. Revision of history. In my 30s, sick of feeling rejected, I made the decision to completely cut contact. Since then, I have only seen her rarely, at family emergencies. She came to my dad's funeral dressed like Mick Jagger, and we played out the same pattern we always do. Me needy, her needy too. For a long time I was sad about our impossible relationship, but the older I get, the more gracious I feel about the tensions between us. I understand more about why we struggled. I see that I had been sold on an ideal of motherhood, promoted by society and films, that I was angry with her for not embodying. Only now I see that was unfair. After all, that same anger was never directed at my equally unavailable dad. Now I'm grateful for the things she did to bring to my life, my love of art, curiosity, bravery, and most of all, paradoxically, how she showed me another version of womanhood that is less domesticated. This supposed gratitude for the behaviour of a narcissist is indicative, of course, of emotional thinking. Having chosen not to become a mother myself and instead forging a career travelling, creating, I often think of that incident in Sainsbury's and of my wild, free, tenacious mother being driven insane by the monotony of doing the weekly shop. In other words, the obligations that are brought with that would be a threat to control, which she rejected. And I have to admit that some of the women I most admire were also not very good mothers, which shows the impact, of course, that her mother has had on her with regard to her looking at how a relationship ought to be. Two recollections of daughters that were involved with narcissists, and as you've heard, they don't necessarily fully understand what has happened to them, which is why work such as my own is so increasingly important to help people gain the insight that they require. Are you the daughter of a female narcissist? Are you the daughter of a male narcissist? If so, you might wish to share your thoughts about how it's impacted upon you and your view of relationships and what went in or on in your relationship with your parents. Have you gone no contact? If not, why not? Share your thoughts in the comments section. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.